We're more than just podcasts and a radio station at Boise State Public Radio. We're a trusted resource and a lifeline for communities across Idaho. It's up to all of us to safeguard public media's future. You can learn more at protectmypublicmedia.org. Together, we can ensure that Boise State Public Radio remains a trusted resource for you and your neighbors for generations to come.
More Idaho Matters now from the studios of Boise State Public Radio News. I'm Gemma Gaudet. The current administration's immigration policies have the potential to have a big impact on Idaho, in particular in industries like agriculture that rely on immigrant labor. Now, these policies could also create fear within immigrant communities, which could impact their involvement in the workforce. Some do argue this might actually reduce job competition, but others say the overall effect could slow our state's economic growth. Now, the issues of immigration policy and how it could impact Idaho will be discussed at City Club of Boise's next meeting during a panel discussion, which will be taking place tomorrow. So joining us now to talk more about this issue are McKay Cunningham. He is a graduate professor and director of the Master of Applied Public Policy program, but he will be the moderator of the discussion at City Club, along with one of tomorrow's panelists, Rick Narabout, CEO of the Idaho Dairymen's Association. I want to welcome both of you to the program.
Hi, Gemma.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
So, Rick, let me start with you. President Trump's campaign promise was on day one, I will launch the largest deportation program in American history. So, Rick, if that were to happen, we're a month into this new administration, how would that impact Idaho's dairy industry, even its ag industry overall, in your opinion?
Yeah, if there was an indiscriminate deportation effort that was undertaken that would target anybody in country without status, it'd be devastating for U.S. agriculture, not just Idaho, but U.S. agriculture in general, with half of our workforce being unauthorized today. So that would limit our ability as a country to even feed ourselves.
How reliant are these industries, including the dairy industry, on the immigrant workforce? I mean, you said 50% of your workers.
So just looking at the percentage that are foreign born, in dairy in Idaho, we know 90% of our workers are foreign born. So very dependent upon an immigrant workforce. And you'd see similar stats across the country on, immigrants filling agricultural jobs. So Idaho dairy's not unique in our dependency there. We're probably a little bit unique in that we are as open as we are about this issue, and we speak about it as often as we do.
So, Rick, could the industry survive if all undocumented workers were not just deported, but as I mentioned, there is a fear within the immigrant, this undocumented population to frankly not show up for work?
Well, thankfully, that latter part has not happened within the dairy industry so far. There's been some isolated incidences of self-deportations and individuals just leaving the country out of fear, but largely our workers are still showing up, which is, again, we're very thankful for that. The reality is dairy and all the agricultural industries, we're a bit unique in that our animals have to be fed a couple times a day and they've got to be milked a couple times a day. And if those things don't happen, you start to damage that dairy animal to the point that she's no longer a productive animal. And you, within a matter of days, you would put that business in a position where it's no longer viable and they'd have to sell out. So for us, because we have such stringent husbandry demands and we have to milk our animals multiple times a day, that adds a level of complexity to it, whereas you don't have that same complexity in other agricultural industries, although across the board you would have significant damages to any agricultural business if you just removed all of these workers.
Rick, you mentioned that if the migrant workforce were deported, even 50% of the migrant workforce were deported, this would have a massive impact on all of us being able to feed ourselves. I want to dig into that a little bit more. Um, I just looked up the average cost of a gallon of milk as of today. It is more than $4 for a gallon of milk. That's on average. So it can be, close to $5 some places, closer to $3 other places. If Idaho loses 50% of its migrant workforce, how do you see the price of a gallon of milk going up or down?
It would go up significantly. How much is really difficult to try and estimate, but
Mm-hmm.
and again, it's not like this issue is isolated to Idaho. So you'd have the same level of damage to surrounding states if you had a federal effort to deport all these individuals. So you're going to damage the entirety of the U.S. dairy industry. And really, it would probably come down to what would the availability of milk be for the U.S. consumer, not the price, regardless of what you're willing to pay for it. Could you even find it?
So talk a little bit more about that, Rick, because I think the argument that we have heard mostly is the cost of things, right? The cost of milk, the cost of eggs, the cost of gasoline. You've made a good point. Regardless of if you can pay for it, would we be able to find it? Tell us how that would potentially work if this migrant workforce were deported.
Yeah, and again, it goes back to the fact that for a dairy cow to stay productive, she's got to be milked and fed multiple times a day. And as soon as you disrupt that lactation curve, she's on a whole different trajectory. And if you go multiple days without milking her, she's completely done for that lactation. It's a very risky comparison, but a lactating mother is the same way in that if they can't continue to lactate and produce milk, they end up drying up. And a cow is the same way biologically. So if you take away the cow's ability to lactate and completely disrupt her as a lactating animal, well, now she becomes a beef animal and she's no longer valuable for dairy production. So that's what we're talking about when you start to look at the disruption that this could cause in the dairy industry and the shortage of milk. If you have these widespread deportations, we don't have the ability to take care of our animals and continue those lactations.
McKay, I want to bring you into the conversation and talk a little bit about the constitutionality of all of this. We have seen quite a few executive orders in the first 30 days of this new administration, many dealing with immigration. What is the constitutionality of these executive orders that pertain to immigration?
Yeah, immigration has long been the province of the federal government and the federal government alone. And more particularly, immigration regulation has been the sole province of federal Congress. And that's not specifically laid out in so many words in the U.S. Constitution, but the U.S. Supreme Court has reminded us over and over and over again that federal Congress is the sole regulator of immigration policy. So that begs the question you just asked: how is it that we are seeing all of these executive orders, which come from the president, not from Congress, that seem to affect immigration policy? And the constitutional norm at play here is whether or not those executive orders either build upon or support a prior congressional law, or do they conflict with a prior congressional law or with the U.S. Constitution? In other words, executive orders are really seen as the president actually executing on a prior law, administering a prior law, rather than creating new law in and of itself. And we say that the executive order is unconstitutional when it appears to create new law and or contravene prior statutes or the U.S. Constitution. And I'll give you a really good example. The president recently issued an executive order that ends birthright citizenship. Birthright citizenship is a part of the U.S. Constitution. It's in the very first sentence of the 14th Amendment, and it's one of those very few provisions of the Constitution that is not amorphous or nebulous. It's pretty clear, and I'll read it real quick. It says, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States. And so President Trump's executive order that says birthright citizenship is no longer the law of the land seems, at least in my opinion, to completely contradict this provision of the U.S. Constitution. And so far, the four courts that have picked up that challenge, all four of them have very quickly blocked this executive order for its unconstitutionality. So all of that to say, federal Congress has the power to regulate immigration. The president, through executive orders, has the power to use discretion in how those immigration laws are actually enforced.
Mm-hmm. So either McKay or Rick, either of you, if you could answer this next question. The president did promise to first deport criminals, right? That was his big promise, to get these criminals out of the United States. How at risk are Idaho farm and dairy workers when it comes to this? I mean, even if they're not as at risk, again, we're seeing that it's not just criminals that are being deported.
So I'll take first stab at it here, McKay. You can play cleanup. But what we've observed the last month is ICE indeed is just seeking out individuals involved in criminal activity when they've come to agricultural facilities and picked up individuals. We know of a couple instances where this has occurred. In both those instances, they've also picked up collaterals, which are individuals that are in proximity that also were without legal status. They picked up those collaterals, but those collaterals were later released. And so what we are seeing in practice so far in the last month in ag facilities is exactly what they said they were targeting and focused on.
McKay, I have about I have 2 minutes left. So jump in real quick, McKay.
Okay, sorry, I'll try to be quick. I mean, one of Trump's recent executive orders titled Protecting the American People Against Invasion has declared an invasion to be occurring, which allows for expedited removal without process under the law. And part of that executive order states that undocumented aliens must register their presence, and that failure to register their presence is a crime. So all of that to say that this idea that we're going to prioritize criminals for deportation, now, if you are an undocumented person and you did not register, that itself could be a crime under this new executive order.
Very quickly, I think we could all agree that we need sensible immigration policy in this country. How will that, McKay, would you say, impact ag workers in Idaho if we have sensible immigration policy?
Yeah, and I think Rick can speak to this really well. Also, I mean, we have the H-2A visa program, and that allows for seasonal migrant workers to work in our agricultural industry. What we need is something similar to that, which would be a sensible immigration policy that would allow for dairy workers, because as Rick was just telling us, dairy is not seasonal. And we need these migrant workers for the year round, but there is not a visa program that really specifically applies to them. So I think there's smart things that we can do. I think that we do need control at the border with regard to a clear and fair immigration policy, and that they are possible.
I want to thank both of you so much. We're out of time. We've been talking with McKay Cunningham, graduate professor and director of the Master of Applied Public Policy program. He will be the moderator of tomorrow's upcoming discussion at City Club of Boise, along with one of the panelists, Rick Nairabout. He is the CEO of the Idaho Dairymen's Association. And that'll do it for this episode of Idaho Matters. Thanks so much for listening. And just a reminder, you can find all of our episodes wherever you get your podcasts.
Each morning, it's a new opportunity, a chance to start fresh. Up First from NPR makes each morning an opportunity to learn and to understand. Choose to join the world every morning with Up First, a podcast that hands you everything going on across the globe and down the street, all in 15 minutes or less. Start your day informed and anew with Up First by subscribing wherever you get your podcasts.